to see you. Thank you so much for getting out for our 10 o'clock service. Live stream, if you're joining us online, great to have you with us as well. Whether you're normally in the room or you've never been in the room, we consider you part of our family as well. It's great to have you with us. Is everyone feeling all right in the room in Solihull? Yeah? Yeah, you don't sound entirely convinced, but that's okay. Yeah, I hope you're feeling good at home. My name's Justin, and we are starting a brand new series today called Peter. Look at him there, holding the keys. He's looking good. Peter. So if you're new to this, you're a little unsure as to who Peter is. So while Jesus was on the earth, he picked 12 disciples to follow him. And then those were the guys who really, after Jesus had gone back to heaven, got the church going. And Peter, he's kind of the main man. In fact, Jesus said, listen, you're the one that I'm going to build this on. We're going to get it going with you, Peter. Peter was a fisherman in northern Israel, and he's just brilliant. He's just brilliant because he's not always the brightest button in the box. He's not always the most self-controlled button in the box. But he chooses to follow Jesus, and in that time of following Jesus, he has many ups and many downs, sometimes in the same 2-minute time slot. You know, have you ever thought, like, oh, things are going really well. I'm doing really great. I've not messed anything up or got anything wrong or said anything I shouldn't or upset anyone. Oh, no, there we go. It's all gone wrong again. If you ever have that experience, don't worry, you're as unstable as Peter. It's okay. It's okay. So we're going to look at the life of Peter over the next 7 weeks. We're going to unpack 7 different moments. This morning, I want to look at when Jesus met Peter. It's a bit like when Harry met Sally. Is that a good film? I've never actually seen it. Is it a good film? No, it's not a good film. Is it a suitable film for church? No. Wow. Boom. Don't watch that then. Live stream, don't watch. Stay tuned. So when Jesus met Peter, what we're going to do this morning, we're going to unpack the different accounts that the gospel writers give us. So we're going to lay out kind of how Jesus and Peter met. So I'm going to need you to come with me, do a little bit of thinking, piece it together with me. Once we've got that picture, then the fun will begin. Okay? And we'll get into preaching and we'll go for it and you'll be excited and God will transform our lives. But I need you just to work with me for the first couple of minutes. Is that okay? Is that okay? Okay, fab. So let's jump to it then. When Peter met Jesus. Our message title this morning is Dirty Nets and Stinky Fish. Everyone tell your neighbour, dirty nets and stinky fish. Matthew 5 tells us this. One day, as Jesus was walking along the shore beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew, fishing with a net, for they were commercial fishermen. Jesus called out to them, "Come be my disciples, and I will show you how to fish for people." And they left their nets at once and went with him. Everyone say, left their nets. So there's these 2 fishermen, and they're fishing by the Sea of Galilee, which is actually a lake, but that's okay in northern Israel. And this Jewish rabbi teacher walks past and says, "All right, boys, come follow me." And they go, "Yeah, all right, that sounds like a plan." Leave the nets, and off they go and follow him. Now, if you were at work and a religious leader walked past and went, "Hey, come follow me," would you leave everything and just walk off? I mean, I guess it depends what you feel about work, doesn't it? I mean, that's kind of the bottom line, isn't it, really? So Matthew tells us that there's this conversation on the shore while they've got their nets where Jesus walks up to these 2 fishermen and says, "Come on then, boys, you follow me and I will teach you to fish for men." They leave their nets, everyone say nets, and they follow him. And then as you read on in the story of Matthew, Matthew then jumps into telling us what Jesus was teaching. So Jesus goes on a little teaching tour, a little preaching tour around the synagogues, around the open countryside of northern Israel, and he's teaching and preaching, and Matthew tells us kind of all the things that he's teaching and preaching. If we jump to Mark's gospel, Mark gives us a little bit more. And that's the thing to note with the gospel. So if we picked 4 people from this morning and said, okay, explain what happened, some of you might talk about the coffee, you might talk about one of the songs, you might talk about Catherine and getting everyone to dance in church, you might talk about the preaching, but 4 people would probably have a slightly different viewpoint on the same thing that happened. And this is what we get with the Gospels, with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're recording the same story, but they're bringing a different perspective to it. So here's what Mark tells us. He says this: one day, as Jesus was walking along the shores of the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew fishing with a net, for they were commercial fishermen. Jesus called out to them and said, "Come be my disciples, and I will show you how to fish for people." And they left their nets at once and went with him. So Mark gives us the same conversation as Matthew. Yes, we're all agreed. Yep, they're on the beach. They're kind of faffing around with their nets. Jesus says, "Come on, boys, follow me." They leave their nets and they follow him. Whereas Matthew then tells us what Jesus was teaching, Mark gives us a little bit of an itinerary as to what he was doing. So Mark goes on to tell us this in verse 21. Jesus and his companions went to the town of Capernaum, and every Sabbath day he went to the synagogue and taught the people. They were amazed at his teaching, for he taught as one who had real authority, quite unlike the teachers of the religious law. A man possessed by an evil spirit was in the synagogue, and he began shouting, "Why are you bothering us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One from God." Jesus cut him short. "Be silent. Come out from the man." At that, the evil spirit screamed and threw the man into a convulsion, but then he left him. So, conversation on the shore. Come follow me, be my disciple. Matthew and Mark give us that. Mark then gives us that they go to a synagogue in Capernaum where Jesus cleanses a man of an evil spirit. If we jump on a little bit further in Mark 2:29, it says this. After Jesus and his disciples had left the synagogue, they went over to Simon, that's Peter, and Andrew's home, and James and John were with them. Simon Peter's mother-in-law was sick in bed with a high fever. They told Jesus about her right away. He went to her bedside, and as he took her by the hand and helped her to sit up, the fever suddenly left, and she got up and prepared a meal for him. So, conversation on the seashore. Trip to the synagogue in Capernaum. Back to Simon Peter's house for tea, heals the mother-in-law. Everyone with me so far? Yeah? Okay, this is when Peter met Jesus. Okay, let's jump to Luke, because Luke gives us even more. Then Jesus went to Capernaum. Aha. So we've not heard of Peter yet, but what we're told is Jesus is in Capernaum. Anyone want to guess where he's going? The synagogue. Jesus was in Capernaum, a town in Galilee, and taught there in the synagogue every Sabbath day. There too, the people were amazed at the things he said because he spoke with authority. Once, when he was in the synagogue, a man possessed by a demon began shouting at Jesus, "Go away, why are you bothering us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One sent from God." Jesus cut him short. "Be silent," he told the demon. "Come out of the man." The demon threw the man to the floor as the crowd watched. Then it left him without hurting him further. Amazed, the people explained what authority and power this man's words possess. Even evil spirits obey him and flee at his command. Then the story of what he had done spread like wildfire throughout the whole region. After leaving the synagogue that day, Jesus went to Simon's home. Anyone guess what he's going to do there? Went to Simon Peter's home, where he found Simon's mother-in-law very sick with a high fever. "Please heal her," everyone begged. Standing at her bedside, he spoke to the fever, rebuking it, and immediately her temperature returned to normal. She got up at once and prepared a meal for them. Okay, follow with me. So Matthew gives us a conversation on the beach where Jesus comes and says to Simon and his brother Andrew, "Come follow me." They leave their nets. Mark gives us that conversation and then tells us that they went to Capernaum where Jesus cleansed a man of an evil spirit, and then they went home to Simon and Andrew's house where he healed Simon's mother-in-law of a fever. Yes? Okay, then Luke goes on. One day, Luke 5. So this is after the synagogue, and this is after we've been to Simon Peter's house for tea and healed the mother-in-law. So this is after the first conversation where they left their nets. Yes? You with me? Okay, good. One day, as Jesus was preaching on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, great crowds pressed in on him to listen to the word of God. He noticed 2 empty boats at the water's edge, for the fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. Stepping into one of the boats, Jesus asked Simon, its owner, to push it out to the water. So he sat there in the boat and taught the crowds from there. So whose boat is he in? Simon's. And what's Simon doing? Washing his nets. He's washing his nets. But he's left his nets. When Jesus approaches them in Matthew and Mark, he says, "Come follow me," and immediately they leave their nets. And they spend a bit of time with Jesus, and they go to a synagogue and they see Jesus do an incredible miracle. And then Jesus comes to their house and does another incredible miracle. And then Simon goes, "Oh, I haven't washed the nets, they're dirty." So he goes back to the nets. And he's cleaning the nets. This is a separate conversation to the first one. He leaves the nets, he spends a little bit of time with Jesus, and then while Jesus is teaching, Simon thinks, I didn't wash those nets, I better go back to them and wash them. Here's what happens. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, now go out where it is deeper and let down your nets, and you will catch many fish. Master, Simon replied, we worked hard all last night and didn't catch a thing. But if you say so, we will try again. At this time, the nets were so full they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners in the other boat, and soon both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. When Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said, "Oh Lord, please leave me. I'm too much of a sinner to be around you." For he was awestruck by the size of their catch, as were the others with him. His partners, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were also amazed. Jesus replied to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing for people." And as soon as they landed, they left everything and followed Jesus. There's a progression in Simon's call. And I want to say to you, don't worry if it's taking you a little while to get your head around what God is calling you to do. So he approaches him on the beach and says, "Hey, you come follow me." And they go, "Yeah, all right, we'll follow you." They leave the nets. They spend a bit of time. They kind of reprioritize their calendars so that they can fit Jesus in, but then they go back to their normal life. And then Jesus says to them, "Hey, have you caught anything? Go out further to the deep." And Simon Peter says, "Master," because he's starting to get it. He's starting to kind of slightly have an insight into this is not just kind of any ordinary teacher. So we've been fishing all night and we're fishermen, but if you tell us to push out and try again, we'll give it another go. And so they throw their nets out and then they pull in so many fish that the nets are beginning to rip and the boat's beginning to sink. So this is more fish than they were expecting. They should have brought a bigger boat. Now that's a good movie in Church Jaws. Anyway, so it's more fish than they were expecting. So they have to get their business partners, "Hey, come and get your boat as well." And then both boats are starting to sink. And Simon Peter suddenly has this realization, "Oh, flip. I am an unholy man in the presence of a holy God." Because when Jesus first says, "Follow me," he's like, "Yeah, right, I'll drop my nets and come with you." Now he starts to understand who Jesus is. And what does he say? "Lord, please leave me. I am such a sinful man." Let me just jump back to our shame series. It's when you go, "I'm unworthy and shameful," that Jesus makes you worthy. This is the tipping point for Simon Peter. This is the moment where he gets it. Everything's been building up to this moment as Jesus has been walking with him. This call has been developing inside of him. And suddenly Simon Peter goes, "Oh my goodness, this man is no ordinary man. God is working through him. Maybe he's the one. Maybe he is God and I'm a sinful man. So please leave me." And what does Jesus say? "Don't be afraid. It's okay. It's okay." And then he says this, "From now on, you'll be fishing for people." See, in the first conversation, he says, "Listen, I'll teach you. Come with me and I'll teach you to fish for people." But it hasn't quite yet begun. But this is the moment where Jesus goes, "Now you're ready. From this moment on, you're no longer a fisherman. You're working for me. You're fishing for people." What changed? Because Peter realized that Jesus was everything and that Peter was nothing. And that everything compared to Jesus was nothing. So they pulled the boats back on the shore, and as soon as they landed, they left everything. They left everything to follow Jesus. Now, for fishermen to have two boats so full of fish that they're sinking, this is Easter, Christmas, payday, a tax rebate, your premium bonds coming up, and a long-lost auntie you've never heard of, so you're not very upset, dying and leaving you the farm. I mean, this is payday. This is more fish than two boats were expecting to get on one day. So for these guys, this is the biggest business deal they have landed. And yet they leave everything. They leave everything to follow Jesus. See, your dirty nets will wait, but your fish won't. Can't come back for your fish. Can't spend 3-4 days following Jesus around, then come back to two boats of fish. They'll spoil. They'll stink. or someone will have them and they'll have their premium bonds, Easter, Christmas, payday, a tax rebate, and a long-lost auntie's inheritance. Like, the stakes are high. See, before they leave their nets, before what Peter does is he reprioritizes his life. So he doesn't cut anything out. He's like, okay, Jesus, I'm going to fit you in, and I can still fit my fishing in around you. So I'll squeeze you into my life, Jesus. I'll take on board some spiritual practices, but there's no sacrifice. It's this moment. It's this second conversation where Peter suddenly goes, oh my goodness, I'm in the presence of greatness and I'm not worthy. When he realizes that, Jesus, you are everything and I am nothing. And that's the moment that Jesus says, from now on you can fish for men. And he leaves everything behind because he knows next to Jesus, everything is nothing. You know, we have a vision to go from one to many, don't we? Where the passion and the anointing and the call of God that he put into our founding pastor's heart now goes out through every single one of us, and we all go out fishing for women, men, girls, and boys and bringing them into the kingdom. But listen, unless we lay down what we're hanging on to, God can't use us. For you to step into that moment, you have to let something go. There has to be a moment of sacrifice. There has to be this tipping point where you go, Jesus, you're everything, I'm nothing, and everything is nothing compared to you. So what do you want me to do? I'll leave it all behind. Jesus, if you want me to walk away from the biggest payday I have ever had, say the word, I'll go. And Jesus goes, you ready? Let's go. He never goes fishing again. Walks away from it all. John, of course, gives us an entirely different account altogether. But we won't get to that yet because we'll come to Luke 14. Great crowds were following Jesus. He turned around and said to them, if you want to be my follower, you must love me more than your own father and mother, wife, children, brothers and sisters. Yes, more than your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. And you cannot be my disciple if you do not carry your own cross and follow me. In verse 33, he says this, so no one can be my disciple without giving up everything for me. Jesus says to all these great crowds pressing around him, listen, if you want to follow me, it'll cost you everything you've got. It'll cost you everything you've got. Grace is free, but it will cost you everything that you've got. A follower of Jesus is not someone who reprioritizes their calendar to put in some spiritual activity. It's someone who lays their entire life down. Says, okay, Jesus, what do you want from me? Now, the thing is, in our culture, particularly if you've grown up in England, in our culture, it doesn't cost us much to follow Jesus. It actually doesn't really cost us. We can start following Jesus, and apart from having to squeeze an hour and a half in on a Sunday morning, and a few people might think we're a bit odd, the cost is really not that high for us. If you come from other cultures, then maybe the cost is high. And there will be people in the room who've had to walk away from everything in order to be a follower of Jesus. But if that's not your experience, I just want to let you know, just because the culture doesn't demand it, doesn't mean Jesus doesn't. Just because the culture doesn't demand it from you, doesn't mean that Jesus won't. He will ask you to lay everything on the altar. And we're just incredibly blessed at the amount he gives us back. But that's not always a guarantee. And that's not always a given. You cannot be my disciple without giving up everything that you own. Let's go to John 1. John gives us this conversation. The next day, John saw Jesus coming towards him and said, look, there is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. He is the one I was talking about when I said, soon a man is coming who is far greater than I am, for he existed long before I did. I didn't know he was the one, but I have been baptizing with water in order to point him out to Israel. Verse 35, the following day, John was again standing with two of his disciples. As Jesus walked by, John looked at him and declared, look, there is the Lamb of God. Then John's two disciples turned and followed Jesus. Jesus looked around and saw them following. What do you want? He asked them. They said, Rabbi, which means teacher, where are you staying? Come and see, he said. It was about 4:00 in the afternoon when they went with him to the place, and they stayed there the rest of the day. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of these men who heard what John had said and then followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, we have found the Messiah, which means the Christ. Then Andrew brought Simon to meet Jesus. Looking intently at Simon, Jesus said, you are Simon, son of John, but you will be called Cephas, which means Peter. No boats, no nets, no fishing. John gives us the very first conversation, which makes sense of the other conversations. Because John the Baptist has been baptizing to prepare the way for Jesus to come. And it so happens that Simon Peter's brother, Andrew, is hanging around with John the Baptist. And John the Baptist suddenly points out Jesus and goes, there he is, there's the Messiah, there's the rescuer, there's the one who will save us. And Andrew kind of shifts allegiance from John and he starts to follow Jesus around. And then he goes and gets Simon and says, Simon, you've got to come and meet this guy. He's the Messiah. And they meet here. Which is why on the shore with Matthew and Mark, Jesus is not a random stranger. They know each other. They've already met. That's why they leave their nets to follow him. Because in this moment of meeting, Jesus says to Simon, I see who you are, but let me tell you who you're going to be. You're Simon, going to make you Peter. Going to make you a rock. You're Simon the fisherman, but one day you'll be Peter the preacher, and 3,000 people will become my disciples in one foul swoop. It's a moment of meeting. The first conversation, Jesus sees who Simon is, but he tells him who he could be. When Jesus met Peter, there are 3 moments that happen. There's this moment of meeting where he says, I see who you are. I see your failings. I see your sin. I see the good, the bad, and the ugly, but let me tell you who you're going to be. Then there's this moment of calling where Jesus comes back and says, come on, it's about time now you started to follow me. And they start to shift around their calendars. They kind of find themselves in church on a Sunday when they wouldn't have been in church on a Sunday before. They kind of find themselves opening up the Bible and going, oh, so what is this thing? This kind of sounds interesting. Maybe even they've started to pray and they're like, I don't even know what prayer is or who I'm praying to. But they've kind of got this sense that there's something about this Jesus that means I need him in my calendar. And so they shift around their priorities. But then there comes a moment of sacrifice where they finally get it. And they go, Jesus, you're everything, and I'm nothing. And everything is nothing compared to you. I'll walk away from it all to follow you. And I guess my question for us this morning is, so where are you? Where are you on this journey? Maybe you're at base 1, the moment of meeting. Someone's told you about this Jesus, and so you've come to check it out. Well, here's what you need to know. Listen, he sees you exactly as you are, but he sees you as you could be. He knows your name, but he knows what you're going to be known for. And he's going to change what you're known for. And he sees a future and a hope for you. And Simon comes and he hears this and he goes, whoa, okay. And he goes away again. But then Jesus comes back and he says, come on, follow me. And maybe you're at that point, you've started to kind of reorder your life around church and around Jesus. You've started to do strange things that your friends and family are thinking are a little bit odd, but you just know that there's something about this Jesus. Maybe you're at that moment of calling where you go, I need to explore this more. God is calling to me. If you're there, just let me tell you what's coming next. It's the moment of sacrifice. Where if you truly want to be a disciple of Jesus, he will ask you to lay everything on the line to follow him. Where are you? If you're at the moment of meeting, towards the end of the service, Catherine's going to tell you about next steps and how we can help you take your first steps on this journey with Jesus. If you're on this moment of calling, then you should be getting baptized at our baptismal service, which, by the way, is a funeral. I mean, we dress it up like a celebration, but what he's saying is I die to my old life. I lay everything on the line. I consider everything as lost to me now for the goal of knowing Jesus Christ, my Lord. Maybe you're at that moment of sacrifice. Listen, I want to tell you it's worth it. It's worth it. The things that Peter left 6 hours later, they stank. That thing you're struggling to put down, if you put it down in 6 hours' time, it will just be stinky fish. But you'll be walking in the calling and the purposes that God has on your life. And at the moment, you're clinging on to something that is so fragile, that has no kind of long lasting. It will go the moment the hot sun comes. It will go. Lay it down. It feels like everything, but it's nothing compared to Jesus. Walk away and follow him. I wonder where you are, or maybe you're slightly further on in the conversation. John 21. I said earlier Peter never went fishing again. I lied. I was deliberately setting you up, sorry. So at the end of Jesus' ministry on earth, you know, he's died. That's kind of thrown his disciples into a bit of a spin. But he's come back to life again, and that's made them all happy. And now he does this weird thing of just kind of popping in and out. It's kind of like, now you see me, now you don't. And the disciples are just overjoyed to be seeing Jesus, but they don't quite understand what's going on. John 21 tells us this. Later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. This is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there. Simon Peter, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, the two other disciples. Simon Peter said, I'm going fishing. I'm going fishing. Because this didn't quite go how I thought it was going to go. And some stuff went south. And it went bad. And Jesus has kind of made it good again, but I don't really know what to do with my life anymore. I don't quite know where I'm supposed to go. I've just kind of stuck in this place, so I'll go back fishing. I'll pick up the things that I once laid down, and, you know, whenever Jesus is there, I'm ready, but, you know, when he's not, I'll fish. We'll come too, they all said, because misery loves company. So they went out in the boat, but they caught nothing all night. At dawn, the disciples saw Jesus standing on the beach, but they couldn't see who he was. He called out, "Friends, have you caught any fish?" "No," they replied. Then he said, "Throw out your net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll get plenty of fish." So they did, and they couldn't draw in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." It is the Lord. And Simon jumps into the water and he swims. He leaves everyone else to deal with the fish that are sinking the boat, and he swims and he runs to Jesus. And they have this conversation, which we'll get into at the end of the series, so plug in. But the conversation ends with Jesus saying this to Simon Peter, "Follow me." Actually, what he says is, "You're going to die for me." It's like a replay of that original moment. It's a replay of that original moment where Simon Peter finally understood who Jesus was. And finally he was ready to walk away from everything. And he did, but life just got tough. Life just didn't quite go the way he expected. And so over the process of time, he just started to pick back up a few things that he'd previously laid down. And Jesus so graciously comes and he replays the scene and he says, "Peter, do you remember when you first fell in love? Do you remember that moment where, Peter, you were willing to walk away from everything for me? Peter, I'm calling you back to that moment." And if you can get yourself back to that moment, Peter, in not a few days from now, you are going to catch more souls than you even know is possible. But Peter, you need to lay it all down again. I'm calling you back to your first love. I'm calling you back to that moment of sacrifice and saying, are you willing to re-sacrifice everything? The call of Peter plays out in a number of stages, but there's 4 key ones. There's a moment of meeting where Jesus says who he is, but tells him who he could be. There's a moment of calling where Peter starts to shift his life around and experience and experiment with who God is and what he's got for him. Then there comes a moment of sacrifice where he's willing to walk away from everything. But then in the heat of life, he picks a few things back up again. And Jesus graciously calls him back and says, "Come on, Peter. You're not supposed to be fishing for fish. Leave it all again. From now on, you will fish in my kingdom." I wonder where you are. I wonder what God is saying to you. I wonder if, like me, you've been at this for a while now and you've been following Jesus for a while now. You've had some great moments and some not so great moments. And you've just kind of just step back a little bit. I mean, you're still in church, but Now you'll serve when you're free and it's convenient. And you still give, but that's just because there's a standing order that comes out every month and you never think about it. Whereas in those first days, you couldn't give enough. And you've got your rhythm of prayer, but it's just fitting in really nicely with everything else in your life. It's just become part of the same old. And actually life's just taken on a really nice rhythm. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. But people who live their lives in a nice rhythm won't reach the world. It's people who are prepared to walk away from everything and pay the cost that Jesus says, come on, from now on, let's take you fishing. I wonder where you are. And I wonder what God is calling to you. Let me pray. Jesus, we love you. God, we thank you for your patience and your graciousness with us. That, Lord, you call us by name. Lord, you know who we are. And God, yet you see who we could be. And then, God, you come to us again and you draw us to yourself and we start to experience things in your presence and we start to see stuff that we go, wow, God, this is incredible. But then, God, there comes that painful moment where you ask us to pick up our cross and follow you, to lay everything down. And God, you're so gracious to us because sometimes we need a calling back to that moment again because we've put down our cross and we've picked up our nets. God, I pray for every single one of us. God, would you give us the courage to keep walking with you and to lay it all down? God, for those who don't know you, would they know you have a hope and a future for them today? God, for those who are exploring you, would you give them the courage to lay it all down? And God, for those of us who've laid it all down many times before, God, would you give us the courage to lay it down again? Knowing that what we hold in our hands is nothing but stinky fish when you have called us to a weight of eternal glory in your kingdom. Spirit of God, would you speak into the hearts of every single one of us? Give us the courage to follow you and leave it all behind. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Hey, if you've joined us online, thank you so much for being with us. We would love to continue to connect with you. Please go to renewalcc.com/next steps. Put your email in there. We would love to send you some details about what it means to follow Jesus. But thank you so much for being with us. We love you. We consider you part of our family. And we would love to meet you one day. So have a great day and God bless.